Okay, next we have Shanna describing alienation, experiential loneliness among veterans.
Well, hello. Thanks for that lovely introduction. Once again, I'm Shanna Holt, and today I'll be talking to you all about loneliness, specifically loneliness among American veterans. This presentation does contain sensitive material, including mentions of trauma, war, suicide, and mental distress. I will pause to allow for any necessary adjustments. While we wait, by a quick show of hands, if you feel comfortable, are there any fans of freedom here today? Freedom? Yeah, I thought there might be. Same, honestly. Feeling thankful for veterans and the freedoms they serve to secure is easy. Providing meaningful support is more complicated. That's what I'm here to talk about today. Let's begin. In 2018, 1.7 million veterans accessed mental health care through the United States Department of Veteran Affairs, commonly known as the VA. That number accounts for roughly 10% of all living veterans. Since 9/11/2001, veteran suicide rates are 4 times higher than war-related fatalities. This means that for every individual soldier lost in military combat, 4 additional veterans take their lives upon returning home. Furthermore, of those who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, a full third have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. That's 1 in 3. So what is post-traumatic stress disorder? Commonly abbreviated as PTSD, this disorder is linked to traumatic experiences and is characterized by a variety of persistent symptoms. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, known as the DSM, is essentially the main medical manual used in the United States to categorize psychological dysfunction and diagnose mental disorders. In the DSM, PTSD is divided into clusters of inclusive criteria, among which are 4 subsets of symptoms. When I refer to these symptoms as persistent, what I mean is that they must be present for a full month following the trauma in order to warrant diagnosis. Additionally, at least 1 symptom from each cluster must be present. Some require 2. The 4 symptom clusters are related to intrusion, avoidance, reactivity, and negative alterations in cognition and mood. Intrusion is your classic flashbacks and nightmares, though it does present in other ways as well. Avoidance is essentially an inability or unwillingness to engage with trauma-related stimuli like thoughts, feelings, or reminders tied to the event. Reactivity is also referred to as heightened arousal and includes things like irritability, aggression, hypervigilance, difficulty concentrating or sleeping, a sensitive startle reflex, and destructive or risky behavior. The final cluster concerns negative alterations in cognition and mood. Many of these experiences have crossover with depression symptoms, like negative affect, decreased interest in activities, pessimism and negativity about oneself and life in general, and difficulty experiencing positive emotions. This cluster also contains symptoms related to impaired memory function, exaggerated feelings of blame, and, this is pertinent, aspects of isolation. So let's talk about isolation. This is important because the scientific literature surrounding the concept of loneliness lacks cohesion. Despite diverse definitions, there is some agreement regarding the differences between social isolation and loneliness. For example, do y'all remember COVID? Like early COVID? Yeah, those were times of social isolation. Social isolation is an objective experience, meaning it's rooted in observable reality and is determined by the frequency of interactions and number of encounters with others. This also includes integration within social networks like churches, clubs, and friend groups. Social isolation basically measures how often you do or don't engage with others socially. Loneliness, on the other hand, is a subjective experience, meaning it's rooted in personal perception. This refers to how an individual interprets interactions and experiences their social environment. Loneliness is really looking at whether or not one feels connected and understood during social exchange. The important thing to remember is that the two are not necessarily correlated. One can have low levels of social isolation as in being very socially active and still experience high levels of loneliness. Conversely, an individual can be quite isolated socially without feeling lonely very often. One does not necessarily equal the other. A 2015 study by Stein and Tubal-Masiak sought not only to delineate loneliness from social isolation, but to define an idea they refer to as experiential loneliness. By examining the narrative testimony of Israeli combat veterans, these researchers subdivided the concept of loneliness into 4 constituent parts. Experiential loneliness is characterized by feelings of alienation, a sense of dual populations, failed intersubjectivity, and a lack of ability to describe traumatic experiences. This proposal is concerned primarily with the aspect of alienation. Alienation can be broadly described as a sense of disconnection from oneself and others. It's a failure to relate and feel understood. Like loneliness, alienation is subjective and measured by personal perception and self-appraisal. The study by Stein and Tuval-Masiak described alienation as one component of loneliness. A plethora of literature links loneliness to PTSD. There's even evidence that correlates loneliness with negative alterations in cognition and mood, which makes sense since feeling isolated is one symptom within that cluster. This study aims to test the proposed link between loneliness and alienation, as well as additional claims that alienation appraisals following trauma are linked to negative alterations in cognition and mood. In statistical analysis, this relationship would be evaluated using mediation modeling. In short, this study will look at loneliness. More specifically, it will explore the concept of experiential loneliness among American veterans. It will investigate the potential relationship between loneliness and alienation. And finally, it will seek to understand the interplay between alienation and negative alterations in cognition and mood. In order to examine these relationships, I'm going to need some data. Proposed data collection will take place over 2 phases. Phase 1 will occur online and consist of the PCL-5 and the UCLA loneliness scale, along with demographic information. Clever listeners might guess that the UCLA loneliness scale measures levels of loneliness, which it does. Conveniently, it also measures social isolation, so the 2 can be differentiated. The PCL-5 screens for symptoms of PTSD as defined by the DSM. Phase 2 will take place face-to-face and consist of an alienation questionnaire, followed by a focused discussion panel composed of veteran volunteers. This framework would allow for quantitative measurement and statistical comparisons between alienation, loneliness, and specific symptoms of PTSD. Furthermore, the focus group offers valuable opportunity to consider the unique firsthand experiences of veterans regarding factors of loneliness, feelings about current PTSD treatment offerings, and opinions on potential pathways toward reconnection and healing. I mentioned earlier that literature links feelings of post-traumatic loneliness to negative alterations in cognition and mood. That's fairly well established. What this study expects to find is that alienation mediates that relationship. In other words, alienation is in the middle, acting as a conduit from loneliness to symptoms of PTSD. It is through alienation that loneliness affects cognition and mood. If this is the case, targeting loneliness, specifically those feelings of alienation, would be of paramount importance when considering treatment options for veterans with PTSD. So what is the answer? How do we foster connection with those who feel isolated and alien in their lived experiences, in their very perception of the world? Understanding and empathy are profound components of the human condition and may be imperative for healing the emotional fractures often caused by complex trauma. Social connection is a powerful tool, and there are many novel ways to harness its therapeutic potential. Veteran-specific support groups and group therapies could go a long way toward fostering connection and regaining that sense of lost brotherhood that can stem from leaving military service. Alternatively, there are some exciting things happening with narrative therapy in trauma populations. Narrative storytelling can help organize and reframe traumatic events, allow for externalization of problems, shift internal perspectives, create cohesion and a sense of control, and facilitate emotional processing. If alienation is a sense of disconnection from the self, other avenues to explore might include mindfulness training or somatic therapies, both of which focus on self-awareness and internal mind-body connections. It is my hope that regardless of findings, future research will explore aspects of social connection when considering the mental health and overall well-being of American veterans. Thank you.
Great, any questions for Shanna?
I had a question that I blanked off, I'm sorry.
Alright, well, while we're thinking about that, so I'm just curious as to why did you decide to study this in the first place? Is there something that attracted you to the topic?
Well, yes, there is. I mean, America, yay.
Yeah.
But also, my real interest lies in foster populations, especially foster children who age out of foster care. And I think that there's a lot of crossover in symptoms and just that transitionary period, like graduating from foster care, leaving military service. We see this in prison populations with reintegration. We can see it in domestic violence victims. So I think there's a lot of crossover that can be done here for other populations. I don't feel really emotionally ready to work with a foster population yet, so I picked one that I thought both needed help, would have funding, would be accessible, where I could do some good.
Especially since what the experiences of our veterans at home are is like such an understudied and under-resourced situation.
It is. It's like, yay, support the troops, but then the troops come home and like,
As with many policies. Okay, any other questions for Shanna?
You may have said this, how many are you expecting to have?
I didn't say.
Okay,
I don't have clear set expectations at this point. What I do have would be like a set time frame.
Okay.
So I thought maybe 2 months to just recruit and get all that I could.
nice. Very good.
And supplement the slides, you guys. There's some treatment options.
Nice.
This is what intersubjectivity is.
Take notes, we should ask about this tomorrow.
Oh, there you go. There's some good questions, guys. Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you for adding that.
Yes, I played with the slide like itself and I just couldn't make it work.
This works.
Can you tell us about interconnectivity? I'm quite interested in
Yeah,
that.
so this is a pretty broad subject. This is like, I guess we can best describe it as an overlapping understanding. So while I can't share your exact experience, I can believe you and like understand in a sense what happened and just validate an experience. So it's just an understanding of, hey, even though we're different, like I get it, sort of thing.
Nice.
All right, let's thank Shanna again. Okay, go ahead and